Welcome back, all you lovely people. I hope you had a nice little break there and are ready to start seeing how Mill is going to try to resolve these tensions between justice and utilitarianism. Now, Mill wants to do this by first showing the role that justice plays within morality. And so this is kind of a cool little discussion he has here. He gets this all started by distinguishing morality from expediency. Now, to help explain all this, I'll throw up a picture there. So take all the reasons a person may have for an action. That's the big circle there in the picture. Now, within that big circle, Mill wants to carve out, that little circle in there with the reasons that are based on morality. And outside of that little circle are the reasons based on expediency. So in the circle, morality, outside is everything else based on expediency. So what is the difference then between morality and expediency? Because that's an important distinction that he wants to make. All right, well, let's jump back to the text. This is on page 222, how many twos? 222, where you can see how Mill does this. So yeah, go to page 222, where Mill says, "We do not call anything wrong unless we mean to imply that a person ought to be punished in some way or other for doing it, if not by law, by the opinion of his fellow creatures, if not by opinion, by the reproaches of his own conscience." This seems to be the real turning point of the distinction, there it is, between morality and simple expediency. It is a part of the notion of duty in every one of its forms that a person may rightfully be compelled to fulfill it. Duty is a thing which may be exacted from a person as one exacts a debt. Ooh, I love it. And so what we see here is that morality is about duty and punishment, whereas expediency is not. Unfortunately, Mill doesn't say much more about expediency in this because the rest is just going to go right into morality. But I think we might be thinking, based on what else he says nearby, that if you keep reading, he does mention things like prudence. And I think that's kind of what he has in mind with expediency. Morality will be this thing about your duties, especially your duties to other people, and punishment for not doing your duty. Yes, very good, makes sense perhaps. But then outside of that, because not everything is going to be about morality, those other things can just be about prudence, doing the things you want to do. Or other similar concerns. In any case, the important thing about morality is about doing your duty. And so, well, what is meant by, a duty? And duty is, according to Mill, is something we may compel, he says, a person to perform. As he says, that, as Mill says, is that this is something we can demand or obtain your duty from you. So if you've made a promise, you may have a duty to keep that promise. Most of us would probably think that, I assume. Make a promise, that creates a duty, an obligation to keep that promise. And the idea is that then we may extract, once you make the promise, we may extract that from you by making you, keep the promise. You're like, I don't want to do it. Nope, you're doing it. And of course, if you still fail to perform your duty, then we believe it's okay for some kind of punishment. Mill says it could be formal, right? Come from society, or it might just be informal that you should really feel bad, guilty about that. But some kind of punishment has to happen. And so the punishment then exacts the duty from you in a different way by having you give something else up. So maybe your punishment requires you give up your freedom or some money or maybe even your life, depending on the punishment. But either way, morality in general is about doing your duty. And if you don't do your duty, we may punish you. We extract it from you, either by having you do it. We extract we make you keep the promise. Or if you don't keep the promise, well, then we punish you in some other way, depending on what the punishment is, for the promise. If it's a small promise, maybe you just feel guilty. A big promise, yeah, that could be, maybe you go to jail. I don't know. It depends on how big of a promise you made. Anyway, morality, doing your duty. Now, if you go to stay back on page 222, and scroll down all the way down there. Oh, yeah, all the way to the bottom of that page. You can see Mill say, it's a big one, I know. Now, it is known that ethical writers divide moral duties into two classes, denoted by the ill-chosen expressions duties of perfect and imperfect obligation. The latter being those in which, though the act is obligatory, the particular occasions of performing it are left to our own choice, as in the case of charity and beneficence, we'll come back to that, which we are indeed bound to practice. Charity ain't optional for them, but not towards any definite person, not at any prescribed time. In the more precise language of philosophic jurists, duties of perfect obligation are those duties in virtue of which a correlative right, that's going to be important, a correlative right resides in some person or persons. Duties of imperfect obligation are those moral obligations which do not give birth to any right. I think it will be found that this distinction exactly coincides with that which exists between justice and the other obligations of morality. Holy cow, that is a long passage. There's a lot going on there. It's an awesome passage. I love it. And I want you guys practice, thinking about these longer passages. I want you guys to get awesome, be rock stars, be good readers. But let's break that passage down, and we can do that by going back to the picture I drew there. So now we see, let's look at that morality circle there with all the stuff going on inside there. Now, John Stuart Mill has made a distinction within there about perfect and imperfect duties. And so in this picture, I'll just put in, boom, the perfect duties are inside of that now, the smallest circle in the picture, and the imperfect duties are outside of that circle. But again, we're all looking within morality. So within morality, we've now made a line between the perfect duties inside of the smallest circle and the imperfect duties still there in morality, but outside of that smallest circle. Okay, so there's the picture. Now, what does Mill mean by that? This distinction between, what's the difference between perfect and imperfect? Well, I'll start with imperfect duties because we've talked a bit about these. Our moral, he says, these imperfect duties do not give birth to a right. That's exactly what he says there, because there is no specific person to whom that duty is owed. As Mill is going to say, a very important point, rights require an obligation. If you have a right to something, there has to be a person who has to give it to you or respect it or whatever. Imperfect duties are not going to have that. And as the example, Mill talks about charity. Great, we've talked about charity in this class because Mill says charity is an imperfect duty. Now, Mill says you have a duty to give to the poor. You're not getting out of that so easily. So Peter Singer's like, okay, you still have a duty to give to the poor, but this is like Sir Mix-a-Lot.
I like big butts.
Yeah, he likes big butts. No person has a right to your charity. That is huge. Yes, you have an obligation, a duty to give charity, and you're a bad person if you don't give to charity, but you get to decide where that charity goes. That is your prerogative. You have to give it, but you can decide who gets it. So there's no one specific person or group of people that you have to give it to. You retain that freedom. So sorry, Peter Singer is still like, you gotta give still. Peter Singer, bad, in your closet. He lives in my closet for some reason. Anyway, so if you go back to page 223, you see Mill there on 223. You can see that Mill says that no one has a moral right to our generosity or beneficence. Beneficence just means kindness. No one has a right to your generosity or beneficence because we are not morally bound to practice those virtues towards any given individual. Again, imperfect duties. These are the things that morality says you got to do or you're a bad person. But no particular person can claim it of you. No one has a right to your charity or your beneficence, Mill says. So yeah, someone in poverty can't come and knock on your door and be like, hello, I'm here to collect, my charity from you today. You can be like, well, maybe you're nice and you give it to him, but that was still your option. You say like, no, you don't have a right to it. I get to pick who gets my charity and my beneficence, my kindness. No one has a right to that. No one can claim it. No one person can knock on your door and say, hey, I'm here to collect. No, they don't have that right. No one does. So that's kind of cool, though. I mean, it's interesting because you should be giving charity, but you still get to decide who gets it. No one can say you owe it to them. No one can claim it from you. Now, that's very, very different from perfect duties. Now, these are moral obligations, Mill says, that do give birth to a right, because there is a specific identifiable person who possesses that right, and that specific identifiable person can ask another specific identifiable person to respect that, to have an obligation. So what we're going to see here is that, well, I'll use an example because, well, I'll get the, so I want to do the example. Now, let's go back to the picture first, and then I'll do the example. God, I'm sorry. I'm tired. I'm not on point today. I'll explain perfect duties in general, and then I'll run you guys through an example. Anyway, so going back to the picture first, we see that perfect duties are special because, let's throw it up there, perfect duties involve rights. And then Mill said in that passage I read a little bit ago, the big one, Mill says that when talking about rights, we're just talking about justice. So the role of justice in morality will be about rights and perfect duties. Justice is not about things like charity, beneficence. Justice is not about kindness. Those are the imperfect things you have duties to do, but it's not unjust if you're not giving to charity. You're just a bad person, I guess, but you're not an unjust person. But this is a huge difference because justice, rights, perfect duties are very different from imperfect duties. Because like I said, now we can start walking you through this. Like I said, imperfect duties are perfect because they give a right. And they can give a right because there are two precise things happening. There is a specific identifiable person who has that right. And two, there is a specific person with the duty to respect that right. So there's a person with the right, and there's a person or persons with a duty to respect that right. I'll give you an example now. For instance, Professor Gray, I have a right to keep my property. I hope we all agree. One's outside the window trying to get in. Though I've already had Porch Bandits steal 2 packages. All they got were a bunch of command hooks and some Blue Bottle coffee. The Blue Bottle coffee kills me. Let some Porch Bandits drinking my fancy coffee that I had ordered special from Brooklyn. Next to Cheetos, Blue Bottle coffee high up on Professor Gray's priority list, just in case, you're thinking Christmas gifts. Cheetos, that would be unethical. Bribing well, give it to me after I sign your grades. I'm going to get nothing. Oh, man. Oh, well. Anyway, what was I talking about? My rights to keep my property. Now, there is a specific person who has that right, me. And, well, who has the duty to respect that right? Because if there's a right, I have to be able to find, if I have a right to something, I should be able to point to whoever has to respect that right. So who has to respect? Who has a duty to respect Professor Gray's right to his own property? Well, that's everyone. And that includes you. So I'm just going to focus on you. Yes, you watching the video here. You are a specific person, if you're still watching this. If you're not, I don't know who I'm talking to. You have a perfect duty to respect my right to my property. Hopefully not too controversial. We're just making things clear you probably already believe. But to put this a little differently, you have a perfect duty to not steal from me. And probably everyone else too. But we're just focusing, it's just you and me are here right now. Excuse me. So again, we have a perfect duty. You have a perfect duty because we know 2 things. We know the person who has the right, that's me, and we know the person who has the duty to respect that right. That's you. We can point to these people. That's why perfect duties are perfect. They're very concrete. Remember, we didn't have that kind of concreteness when it came to charity because no one can claim your charity. But I can claim your duty not to steal from me. And now we can go back to Mill and see how he fleshes out this idea about perfect duties and rights, because he says a little bit more about this. So let's jump to page 226. Scroll down a little bit again, and you'll see Mill say here, when we call anything a person's right, we mean that he has a valid claim on society to protect him in the possession of it, either by the force of law or by that of education and opinion. And hey, let's scroll down a little bit further now. And now we can see Mill says, to have a right then is, I conceive, to have something which society ought to defend me in the possession of. So a right, a lot of cool stuff there now. We've expanded this a little bit. So a right is something, again, we've seen possessed by a person or persons, and that right makes a claim on other people. So once again, we've seen that you can't steal from me. So my right makes a claim on you. So I have the claim, right, don't steal property. That makes a claim on you. You cannot steal my property. Don't steal. What do you keep thinking about stealing my stuff? Come on. You're probably, I'm not very rich. I have a curtain behind me. How rich could I be? But not only that, what if you do decide, if you do decide to steal from me, then others are supposed to help me. So not only does it make a claim on you, don't steal from me, it makes a claim on society that if someone does steal from me, society should help, protect me, get it back or whatever. So that's the claim, that we need to have a criminal justice system to catch thieves. So that's what he's saying there in those passages I just read, that my right to my property makes a claim on you, don't touch it, and it also makes a claim on society. Let society help and protect me. So rights are pretty powerful, pretty cool. That's justice, baby. Now let's go back to 223, page 223, where Mill makes his big flourish. Go to 223, scroll down again, and here's where we see Mill say, it seems to me that this feature in this case, a right in some person, correlatively to the moral obligation, constitutes the specific difference between justice and then generosity or beneficence. Justice implies something which it is not only right to do and wrong not to do, but which some individual person can claim from us as his moral right. Again, we've seen this now repeatedly. If you, now I'll point to you this time, and let's talk about your rights. If you have a right, then there has got to be someone with an obligation to respect that right. And society must then have an obligation to protect you with that right. And that is pretty important, because what Mill is saying here is that rights correlate with obligations. Rights correlate with duties. You cannot, I said this earlier, you cannot have a right if there is no one who is supposed to respect that right. And so, just to recap, going back to that picture, we now see how morality is different, because let's just look here. Morality involves duties. And within morality, we see the difference between perfect and imperfect duties, and how perfect duties involve rights. And when you're talking about rights and perfect duties, that's justice. And so putting that all together, justice, you can see from the picture here, is that part of morality dealing with perfect duties and rights. And as the picture also illustrates, important point, let's throw it back up there, the rest of morality is supposed to be kept distinct and separate from justice. So Mill is very serious that charity is not a matter of justice, but your rights, not to be harmed, not to be stolen from, your rights are a matter of justice. But things like charity, kindness, that's morally important. Peter's saying, get back in your closet, Peter. Coming to get you. What's with that guy? Yes, charity, beneficence, not justice, but your rights not to be harmed, not to be threatened, whatever, those are a matter of justice, because that involves your rights to something. And so with that, I hope now we've understand the role of justice within morality. Again, the role of justice within morality is focusing on rights and perfect duties. And so, let's take the stretch break now. I'll go give some water to Peter Singer in my closet there. I know. Jesus, this guy. Take a break. You stretch. Relax your eyes. You can stretch too, Professor Singer. Just give me a second. Let me finish with the kids. You guys go stretch, and then we'll see what follows from all the stuff that Mill has been talking about. But take your stretch, and I'll see you back here in a few.